I guess first one, we can talk maybe broad strokes. Can you describe this project and the timeline in front of it? I guess that's an obvious one for
For
you.
me? So the project involves reimagining the existing pavilions at the Harborplace and reimagining the park space and the promenade and then the surrounding streets. So the idea is to demolish the old pavilions, which we won't do until we're ready to start the entire project, and to come back with a mixed-use project that's focused on local retail with residential as well as commercial uses. The idea being to create this amazing, vibrant place that is unique to Baltimore, that is focused on local and cool things that will keep people coming back over and over again, that's situated in an amazing public space, which includes a new park in the former McKeldin Square, which we hope to recapture, a new amazing public park and amphitheater, and almost 4+ acres of new park space that we're planning on adding.
And Paul, I think it's important as we talk about what's ahead of us to really talk about how we got there, right? And I think it's important for all of Baltimore to be reminded that, like, this had been sitting there literally, the inner harbor had literally been falling upon itself, falling into the harbor for decades. And no one in my position or no one else had done anything other than just raise their hands up and say, like, oh, the inner harbor was once great and now look at it. And what we've been able to do is, through receivership, working with the law department, get it into Dave's hands. I think it's important for people to understand that and the total history of the inner harbor, right? Because we had something, our crown jewel, Baltimore's face to the world, was owned by people from out of the country, not even close to Baltimore City. And now to have it into the hands of someone who is Baltimore through and through, who grew up and lives in West Baltimore, so that we can have it, the harbor, be representative of all of Baltimore. Because for all its glory and all the times that we all know and loved and enjoyed it, there has also been another dark side of that, where people that look like Dave and I haven't been welcomed to the inner harbor. And doing that tough work is not something that we should just push away from. This was something that had been decaying and still is decaying for many, many moons. And now we're talking about showing the next version, the best version of the inner harbor, and have that being done by someone from Baltimore City. This isn't a gift, right? Dave is doing this and making this investment because he believes in Baltimore and knows how great our city is and wants this, our face to the world, to be open to everyone.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do want to kind of do a how did we get here. I mean, Harborplace is older than you. I don't know exactly your age, judging by the amount of I'm going to guess it's probably around the same age as you. How did we get here? How did Harborplace fail? And how do we prevent that same fate 40 years later with this new project?
So, we're real estate people, and Harborplace really was an amazing example of what can be done in terms of real estate revitalization. And when Jim Rouse and Schaefer, and then even McKeldin before then, who sort of envisioned this idea of reimagining downtown, when they came to do the project, the idea was something called a festival marketplace. And it's based on other places, particularly Faneuil Hall in Boston, the idea of creating open marketplace area where you can have lots of unique vendors and things like that that are going to make it a place that people want to visit. And for a while it was very successful. In the 80s it had more visitors than Disney World, and it was this amazing tourist attraction, and it really kind of put Baltimore on the map. And I think it's important to realize that not only did it put Baltimore on the map, it was an example that was then repeated all over the place. It was done in multiple places in the United States. But what you'll also find now is that they're almost all gone because the world changed. And it's not that they were bad ideas, they were actually great ideas for the time. But when those projects got taken over, particularly by large real estate investment firms who didn't have a connection to Baltimore, the choices they made were to drive revenue by attracting national retailers, which isn't bad. We do that too. But they sacrificed the coolness, the uniqueness of the place for Bubblegum Shrimp Factory and other things that you could find in a random airport in any place in the country. And it wasn't unique, and it ended up being basically a mall on the water. And what's happened to malls? Malls are they're gone, right? The malls are gone, and that whole business model of malls has changed because times change. And so the combination of out-of-town ownership who didn't understand, what made the place special, changes in how people shop and use real estate, and then of course we had this thing called the pandemic, which completely changed downtown Baltimore. And not just downtown Baltimore, downtowns all over the world. And now we need to be thinking about the future. How do we reinvigorate this place, and how do we think about this as a catalyst for really sort of telling the story about all the opportunity that Baltimore has to offer?
And I would just add, again, I think that we also have to remember what Dave was saying is spot on, right? For its time. But one thing that Baltimore, we've seen, especially in the seat that I sit in, is the inability to push things along and change things that have been existing in the same way for so long, right? When the Inner Harbor was built, for the first years, for that first round of the Inner Harbor, it was great. But we should have seen, the folks in my seat should have seen long ago that times were changing and pushed for these things to change. This could have been done before, because malls have been dying for over a decade now. Now they're dead, right? And no one's gonna go anywhere to go to a mall. Doesn't matter how beautiful the views of the Inner Harbor are, no one's coming. So for all of those folks who are yelling and screaming about the pavilions and wanting it to go back to the old days, the thing about the old days are that they're the old days. They're never coming back. And we have an opportunity now to do what wasn't done before, is to have everyone working together to showcase that next version of the harbor, because we already know that downtown has been our fastest growing residential neighborhood for quite some time. We're talking about putting forth the best of Baltimore out to the world, because when I go to another city, I don't want to go and see a chain that I can see at any shopping center around the country. I want to see the best of that particular city. And that's what we need to have at the Inner Harbor here for the world to see. And we look forward to seeing that happen so that we can make the Inner Harbor what we know it can be.
That said, there are some local businesses in the pavilions now. What do you think about when you see the pavilions in their current state and their current leasing capacity, and how do you attract businesses into those pavilions now, knowing that the clock is ticking?
So I tell you how we're doing it. We are very focused on attracting small local minority businesses and giving them an opportunity to be in the best real estate in the city. We are helping them with reduced rents. The mayor and Downtown Partnership are also helping through the Boost program and various foundations. Everyone's helping to try to get this place filled back up. And there's a couple of things behind it. One is, of course, this is going to take time. We have a big public process to go through. This whole project requires a referendum, which means that the citizens of Baltimore get to vote on this. This is going to be something that everyone gets to have their say. So while we're doing that, we can't let our crown jewels sit in disrepair. So we're filling up these spaces. And we are finding lots of cool, uses that want to be here. And so, we're making deals and we're getting them in. The second thing that it's doing is, hopefully, these cool businesses are attracting people who haven't been down to the harbor in a long time to go back, reconnect, and remember how awesome our waterfront is. Our waterfront is just absolutely amazing. And so the idea is to give the pavilions a chance to do something. We can't have big vacant buildings or holes in the ground while we wait for this, wait to get through the entitlement process and get everything we need to do to start construction, and at the same time, make it cool to go down for people to visit. And then hopefully the long-term goal is some of those businesses will be able to come back in new buildings in the future, or maybe they'll have grown so big they're off to multiple states and multiple locations, which would also be awesome.
I want to kind of ask a follow-up to that. So you've mentioned these chain restaurants, these chain retail places. That's long been a criticism of the harbor. That's why people, at least residents, always point visitors to the neighborhoods. Go visit this restaurant in this neighborhood or this spot in this neighborhood. Will rent reductions, or I guess how will you prioritize local businesses in the new retail spots of this new reimagined Inner Harbor?
Well, we'll prioritize it because it makes sense. So the truth is, when you're in retail, you have to do something called merchandising. And merchandising is the process of creating a unique mix of retailers that make people come back multiple times. If I'm doing a grocery anchored center, which is not this, but something like more suburban, you need the grocery store, and what goes there? The pizza, the nails, everything that people do in connection with getting their groceries. When you're doing something like this, what you're looking for are unique ideas. And you're gonna have a lot of changeover, like they used to have in the festival marketplaces, right? You're gonna have unique food. You're gonna have, specialty restaurants. You're gonna have cool things that you can only get in Baltimore. So that if we build this as something that is exciting for Baltimoreans, this is our pitch. If we build this as something that's exciting for Baltimoreans, like if we focus on the local and the cool, when your friends come in from out of town, when my family comes in, they'll say, where should we go? What's Baltimore? And everybody say, oh, we know exactly where to go. We're going to the harbor. And that's the kind of experience that it's our job to curate. So that's our job, that's our duty. And it's not, it's not a matter of altruism, it's a matter of that's what's necessary to make the place successful on a long-term basis.
Will there be a public sector area by way of tax breaks or something that the public sector can do that perhaps I'm not thinking about right now?
Well, I think you heard it from Dave. We're already doing that kind of work now for the investments that I've made into Boost, right? And we'll be looking to help in any way that we can as we move forward with this. This is something that's very important, whether it's Crushed by Mac that's in there that has the best Old Bay chocolate chip cookies, and where else but Baltimore you're going to get Old Bay chocolate chip cookies, or whatever businesses want to be downtown. This is what we're trying to do and help. And this is, we were doing that before. We talked about with the Inner Harbor, right? And we're going to continue to support in any way that we can, because we want people who are coming into Baltimore to get the best of Baltimore with the best views that they'll get in the world, and we know they have that at the Inner Harbor.
Let's talk price tag. Can you break down the funds, the split, kind of funding sources? I know it's not all worked out quite yet, but in terms of public money, how much of that might be city, state, federal, grants, all that stuff. You kind of break down the invoice for us, the aspirational invoice.
Sure. I mean, obviously we're very early. We're in the design stage, and we have to get an entitlement and approval from the voters before we can move forward. So the price tag of the private space, and this is, I think, a very important thing that we need to make clear. The pavilions are not public. They're publicly accessible, but MCB owns the pavilions. They're private. The city sold those pavilions to the Rouse Company back in the 70s, or the land, and the city still owns the land, but we own the buildings, and I think that's really important. So we are going to invest in the private space roughly $500 million. That's what we think the price tag of that will be. In addition to that, there's public space. That is the promenade, the roads, McKeldin Square, which we want to turn into this park. Those spaces are public, and those spaces belong to the public, and they will always belong to the city. The city's not selling any of those or transferring any of those, the promenade or anything. That's not getting transferred to MCB, and I think that's an important concept. That space, we think, between what needs to be done on the promenade and the roads and so forth, will be another roughly $300 million to $400 million of work for the public space. We are not asking the mayor for tax increment financing or any of those kinds of subsidies. We are expecting that the state which has already committed $67 million so far, and the federal government, which originally paid for the promenade work, to help with those costs. Right now, and that's kind of how we're looking at it, a combination of private capital, which will take care of private space without any TIF or anything like that. And then in addition to that, there'll be public capital that needs to be raised to take care of the public space. And one thing I want to make really clear.
about to make that
Okay, you make that point.
I think it's really important for folks to know, and for Baltimoreans to know, that we're going to have to fix the promenade regardless, because it's failing and falling into the water. So regardless of the inner harbor, Dave, whatever people think about what's planned for the harbor, that has to be fixed. We have to fix that. Climate change is real, and it's impacting it in a very deep way. But this is also, again, about us reimagining what is possible for Baltimore. We have to dream big. We can't have these folks who want to make the inner harbor great again and turn back the clock. We can't have it to be that Pratt Street and Light Street are going to be just a highway for people to go through. If we want this to be the inner harbor 2.0, the 2023 and forward version of what Baltimore's face to the world is going to be, we have to make critical changes to traffic, to the promenade, to everything that we can touch and see there, so that we can be a better Baltimore. This is what this is about. So yes, you're not going to be able to turn off of Calvert or Light Street onto Pratt Street anymore. It's going to be gone, so that families can actually safely walk and be and enjoy in more park space, not less. I want that to be very clear too. This proposal has more public space than the current existing harbor does. We want those changes to make so that Baltimore can continue to grow into a 21st century city. But the promenade has to be fixed regardless.
I'm glad you mentioned climate change, because I noticed climate resilience is an emphasis in this project. Can you explain why it is? Because rising sea levels, certainly building around the water, it should always be factored in at this point. How is that baked into these plans specifically? I know a lot of people say, well, you shouldn't build big towers next to water with rising sea levels. How is climate kind of factored into the plans?
So this administration and the planning department very focused on climate change and how that's going to impact everything that's near water. So in this particular instance, you've already got flooding. Like if you have a little bit too much rain, the promenade, especially over by where the amphitheater, it already floods. It needs to be done. It needs to be redone.
Today, it's gonna rain.
Right. So the plan is a combination of, and I don't know if anyone who wants to see this should go to the website. All the detail is on the website. Everything we've done is publicly available, including all of the community engagement sessions. All of the feedback from that is on the website, www.ourharborplace.com. But so we're imagining basically in different pieces a two-level promenade. One that's raised above where we expect flooding to be for the next 100 years as we go through, assuming that there's no arrest of the current issues that we have. So we've raised part of the promenade, but we've also created a lower part of the promenade that floats. So effectively, even though we've raised portions of the promenade to prevent flooding, we've also created a lower tier that allows people access to get closer to the water. So that was the concept. The concept is, how do we protect from sea level rise, but also increase engagement with the water? And I think our team came up with an amazing way to resolve that. And we've also added all kinds of effectively marshlands and other things to help with the water quality and with flooding and so forth and so on. And all the buildings also are designed so that if they do flood, the idea is that the setup of the buildings is designed to accept that, which is, unfortunately, unless this whole world changes its path, that's the future. And it's something that has to be done irrespective of whether we go forward with our buildings.
I know there's a lot of concern, you've heard it, about the building height requirements that was discussed at the Planning Commission yesterday, the marathon meeting that I know you were at. What would you say to the opposition who says, look, we shouldn't be building, huge high-rises right next to the white, it's going to ruin sight lines, this, that, and the other? Your response to those concerns?
I'll start. I think people should actually spend a little more time looking. This actually, the proposal allows more sight lines to the harbor than we have today. When you look at where the different views and viewpoints are, and when you also when you think about all the other places, right? Again, we need to have the people there. We can't build, we're talking about climate change, we can't build low buildings there, right? We know that that's not going to work. But I think the plan itself, when you remove all of the other stuff and look at the facts and the reality, the sight lines are more. There are more sight lines to the water. There are more inviting things, inviting everyone in to be welcome into the Inner Harbor in this plan than we have with the existing pavilions today.
Yeah, the existing pavilions today are basically walls with loading docks and trash compactors sitting on our two main streets, Light and Pratt. That doesn't make any sense, right? That made sense at the time, but it certainly doesn't make any sense today. The other thing I think that's important is by going with height, it gives you more access on the ground plane, right? People react sometimes negatively to height, but truth be told, most people will interact with this site, 20 feet in the air. That's it. You're there on the ground. The question is, what is the experience of the pedestrian? And the experience of the pedestrian with this plan, if people take the time to look at it, is absolutely amazing. Park space, big open vistas, lots of ability to see the water, opening up South Street, and views from multiple views now from Pratt and Light into the water, as opposed to looking at the back of Hooters or the back of the Cheesecake Factory. And then the fact is that there's by the vibrancy that's created by putting the residential on top is what allows the entire thing to work. And I think that a lot of people are focusing on the height, but it's a mistake. Height's good, because height, by going up with density, it leaves lots of room on the ground plane for everyday citizens to interact with this amazing space.
I'm glad you mentioned the pedestrian experience. What will change in terms of the pedestrian experience, the transit experience, the transportation experience? Obviously, the Red Line is certainly a big emphasis for the future of the city. It's not going to be going through the inner harbor necessarily. But how will transportation factor in to this reimagined Inner Harbor?
Well, I said it earlier, right? Like right now we know that Pratt and Light are like highways, right? People, they're not inviting to people to actually want to come downtown with their family and walk around. It's not safe for them to do. So what's going to happen is that little spur, when you come up Light Street and you turn on the Pratt, it's going to go away, so they can reconnect and recapture, as they say, McKeldin Plaza, to have a better and bigger public park there. We're going to be talking about looking at the lanes. We do not need all of those lanes of traffic on Pratt Street that we have, right? We just don't do it. If we want families, if we want people to be gathering at the Inner Harbor, we can't have that, because people are literally putting their lives at risk, because we are telling folks that we want them to come there, but then telling other folks, if you want to get where you're going quicker, come through the Inner Harbor, come through. You don't see that anywhere. You can't drive through Times Square anymore, right? You have to get out of your car, you have to walk. That is the kind of things that we're going to be working with Dave and the team on as we reimagine. And this is going to happen again, regardless of what's happening at the Inner Harbor, because it's the right thing for us to do for 21st century transportation way of thinking.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, that's it. We are going to prioritize pedestrians. We're going to prioritize public transportation. Our plan hopes that the Red Line will be successful, and that there'll be a major corridor on Pratt Street for public transportation. We are talking about taking away lanes so that people don't speed through there, and that we encourage people to use other ways to get from one side of the city to the other, as opposed to cutting through our crown jewel. So that's a big focus for this.
And Paul, I'll just add, and you can see that we're planning that, right? For example, folks said they're like, oh, the mayor is closing Pratt Street for a music festival, and it's going to create a bottleneck in downtown. And guess what? Everyone existed just fine. And then we did it the next weekend for the Maryland Cycling Classic, and everything was just fine. The year before, we had the Maryland Cycling Classic and the Orioles at the same time, right? Everyone was just fine. We had an Orioles game and a concert at the stadium and a concert at the arena, and everyone was just fine. But everyone will be even better if they actually start to use public transportation. When we have a red line and had a better public transportation system, this is what major cities want. You're not going to go to other major cities and just barrel through their downtown, and that's what Baltimore should do, so that we're actually saying and showing people that we want people to actually be there, walking around and participating in all the great things that are coming here and that are to come.
Mr. Bramble, you've heard some of this criticism before. The renderings have been criticized as AI-generated, inauthentic, slick and chic, not representative of Baltimore. Your reaction when you hear things like that?
Can I go first there? I just got to go first there. Paul, and I heard, we heard there was a gentleman on the Planning Commission last night that said that Dave should hire professionals. And I think it's time for somebody to pull the Band-Aid off, right? We know this is Baltimore. MCB and Dave and his team do this work, not just here, but around the country. They are professionals. They hired professionals from around the world to come up with these renderings and did something that, quite frankly, most folks don't do in Baltimore. They went to the community first to talk about this. And I think it's also important for us to note that when you hear some of the things that some people saying, the racial undertones that are there, when folks say, like they said to Dave, that, oh, he should hire professionals. MCB does deals around the country. They do real estate around the country. This is what they do. Why is it that it's okay for someone to say to Dave to hire a professional? Quite frankly, we all know why that is, and we have to have a duty to call that out. The hidden racism in this, because Dave is a black man from West Baltimore. He needs to hire professionals to do better by our inner harbor. He knows just as well as anybody else because he lived here. Quite frankly, because he grew up a young black boy in Baltimore, he knows the total experience of the inner harbor. And folks who don't think that he and his team are professional and didn't put in the work, they should be able to check themselves, because they have to understand that if they wanted something different, they should have stepped up a long time ago, especially those who are in the same industry as Dave who are complaining, and done something. They could have, they didn't. Now they should be lining up to support him and support the city and all of us who believe in Baltimore and want the inner harbor to be in the best version of itself.
I'm going to say that the lead architectural firm on this project is the largest architectural firm in the world, Gessler. And Vaki Mwema, who's our lead architect, is based right here in Baltimore in 1 East Pratt Street, and I think he qualifies as a professional. The architect who designed the so-called sale building, our signature building, was last year, or 2022, I guess, named the most innovative architect in the world, and won a competition that we held with several major architects to be the architect that we chose to lead the project. And the team at MCB, it's not just me. I mean, I'm the face of this, but there's a pretty significant team at MCB with a senior management team that has 150 plus years of experience in this business. Our team has combined built over the years, if you take all of our professionals, over 44 million square feet of real estate. You know, I try, you know, you have to have a thick skin in this business. That's the nature of it. But we do have a world-class team of international and local architects, including BCT and Sultan Campbell Britt and Unknown Studios and Biohabitats, a really world-class team working on this project. And so I think that they do deserve credit for a lot of work that was put in. And one of the things I think is really important is that, as the mayor said, we did listen first. We would not release the architects and planners to start with designs until we held a community engagement session. Because what we told them, it was very important to hear what people were saying before we started planning. That doesn't mean we drew what everybody said. Because if we did, we'd have a bull riding thing and a Ferris wheel and an old folks home on top of a roller coaster. That's not how it works. But what it does mean is that we listened. And the next part of this is now we listened, we drew. Now we've presented. Now it's time for Baltimore to respond. This is the chance for people to respond. And I will tell you, overwhelmingly, the responses that we have received have been amazingly positive. There are, of course, always a few loud folks who don't want change. I think change is hard. But overwhelmingly, I would tell you, this city has been behind us and cheering us on and giving us comments like, hey, what about this? And think about that. And those who have engaged with us, post us presenting the plan, some of them have come up with really good ideas, I think, that we'll incorporate as we continue to iterate. And that's what we need. We want public engagement. We want this to be done out in the open. That was one of the things that the mayor was insistent on from the very beginning when I first called him and said, hey, we might buy this project. He said, this has all got to be out in the open. And I said, absolutely, that's how we're going to do it. And I think that's what we've done, and that's what we're going to continue to do. And I think the fact that we need a charter amendment speaks for itself.
Was there something, Mr. Bramble, that came from those listening sessions or maybe from the ongoing feedback that you can point to that, we incorporated that directly from public feedback?
Yes. Well, think about it more conceptually because, most of the public, they're not real estate folks. So what people really think about, honestly, is not the height of the building. What they really think about is how they're going to interact with the building. And what we heard over and over again was accessibility, connectivity to the water, and local. And I think local and water connectivity were the top things. What people didn't want to see was a big wall that like you have in other parts of the city sometimes, which happens when you don't have height, right? Where you can't get to the water. It's hard to access it even though it's all public. And then the other thing that people were very focused on, and I think our designs incorporate this, were making sure it will be full of opportunities for local, cool businesses. And if you look at our designs, that's how it's set up. The idea is that we're going to fill up these marketplace spaces with those kind of businesses, the kind of businesses that are going to make this space cool.
It's an ambitious plan. Is there something from it that you can't live without? What is the must in this plan?
You mean outside of the resiliency? Because we won't be able to live without that.
That's
right?
true.
That's a reality.
That's true. It won't be buildable without the resiliency. I think there's quite a few elements that are critical. Obviously, as we go forward and as we have conversations with the administration and with the community, things will change. That's the nature of this. But we absolutely need tall residential buildings. That's one of the key things. And there's two main drivers to that. One obviously is economic and economic sustainability. You want something that's going to work. But the other piece here is activation. One of the things we heard over and over again was public safety. How do you make a place safe? You keep it from being a vacuum like it is now. If you go to those places now, as we're filling them up, they're not filled yet, they've been vacant and abandoned for years. And you don't feel safe and welcoming walking around there. You feel like it's a place you got to run through to get to the other side of the water. So that's critical. I think amazing park space is critical. And because that amazing park space is what's going to bring people there to linger and enjoy, which is important. And then, of course, the changing of the road networks to make them, to narrow the lanes, to slow traffic down, to make it pedestrian friendly. I think those are some of the key elements of the plan. Do they have to be exactly what we've shown? No, of course. That's the purpose of the design process. But those elements will need some level of incorporation.
There are certainly other stakeholders involved in this, even though they're not directly involved. What have you heard from some of the other anchor institutions down there, whether they be the aquarium or the science center, or even as far out as Camden Yards and some of the other convention center, some of those other stakeholders in the area? Have they come to you with ask or request or emphasis at all?
Yes, they have. We've been speaking with them, talking to them. There have been tweaks to the plan, but I think that the most important thing that's come out of that is this whole sense of collaborating around downtown. In our perfect world, now obviously we're just responsible for our little piece there, but there are all these other amazing things about downtown Baltimore. The aquarium, which is bringing in zillions of visitors a year, the science center, CFG Arena, For everyone who says, oh, people aren't coming back to Baltimore, go to the arena.
Kiss was there. We should have saw the arena then, right? It's packed all the time.
The truth is, people do want to be in Baltimore, but we have to be okay with having nice things. We have to be okay with that. We have to be okay with growth, with having nice things, with wanting nice things. And in our perfect world, downtown Baltimore becomes this amazing walkable district where you feel comfortable and confident all the way down, walking from Harbor East, walking all the way around, eating, drinking, staying at a hotel, doing whatever you want. You go down to the Stadium District, you go over University of Maryland, up to Lexington Market, the Bio Park, CFG Arena. You feel great and you know exactly what to do. And we believe the harbor is the centerpiece of that, but without ultimately that overall connectivity, we won't reach our full potential. And I know it's something that the mayor's focused on.
And that's why we unveiled Downtown Rise, because we want to grow that connectivity, because great things are happening, right? Like CFG, much like the harbor, sat there looking like it was built when Earl of Pearl Monroe played there for many years. I actually had an opportunity, Paul, and this is a great story, during the first year of the CIAA tournament, to stand there with Earl the Pearl Monroe himself and show him a picture of himself playing basketball on the same part of the court that we were standing on. And he said, it looks exactly the same in here, right? That's what has happened in Baltimore. We just allow these great things to sit there because we can't agree. There's 1,000 different plans, and no one, especially whoever the mayor was during that time, didn't make a decision and say, all right, this is what we're going to do. I made that decision on CFG. People told me I was crazy. One gentleman told me I was putting a lipstick on a rat, and when I saw him at the sold-out Janet Jackson concert, I said, the rat looks pretty good tonight, right? We have to make those big decisions, and we did the same thing with getting MCB and the team involved in the harbor so that we can make that connectivity through downtowns. We know that renovation is going to come to our great stadiums. We're going to now be working, right? The next thing that we have to work with is to make sure that we're modernizing our convention center, supporting continuously the aquarium and all the other things. We have to make it all connect together. They can't be seen as individual parts. They have to be seen as fingers on a mighty fish that is downtown Baltimore.
All right, so here's your challenge and your responsibility to talk to city residents here, because I heard it yesterday and it was outside of the Planning Commission. $1 billion for downtown, $1 billion for the Inner Harbor, and you know, people don't distinguish between public and private. They see a price tag and they want money into their neighborhoods. You know, they see the vacant building prices, and I know that the vacant buildings are going down. So sell it to city voters here, sell it to city residents. And I know there's probably going to be an economic driver message here as well, but why is this so important that, you know, money needs to be put here?
Well, the message for me is that this is a both and I've been very clear, and my record speaks for itself. No mayor has been investing in neighborhoods the way that I have. Hundreds of millions of dollars into neighborhoods, whether it's Park Heights, whether it's Emerson Village Shopping Center, where the city is spending millions of dollars, and then across the street at Uplands to make sure that those neighborhoods, whether it's Chum, whether it's East Baltimore, we are making the investments into our neighborhoods, whether it's the historic investments that we're making into recreation and parks, whether the work that Dave is doing at Madison Park North and has done in Northwood, those investments are happening. And yes, we have driven vacant properties to its lowest in over 20 years, and we're going to be talking publicly about how we can use public money to ramp that up over the next 10 years. But this also has to happen for Baltimore. This is for all of Baltimore. Again, this isn't public money. We're going to be using the public money in our neighborhoods. This is private investment into Baltimore's face to the world that generates jobs and opportunities for all of us. And my message to Baltimoreans is we have an opportunity to finally do this the right way, to have this be built by, for, and with the people of Baltimore, by somebody from Baltimore. Don't allow the folks who are trying to play Jedi mind tricks to get you to do something else that won't benefit all of Baltimore. What I know about Dave and his team is that they believe that every single resident in this city, that the Inner Harbor belongs to them. And this is how we're going to grow our city into the best version of itself. While we make the investments into our neighborhoods around town, we also have to make the investment into Baltimore's face, which is the Inner Harbor, so that we can grow into the best version of our city.
And that said, I mean, I'm always shocked and saddened when I hear from people in this city who've lived here their whole lives, who are young people who say they've never been to the Inner Harbor.
Yeah.
It may as well be a different country.
Well, I think that, Paul, I started out with that, and that's one of the reasons why we worked to get it into Dave's hands. Because look, I remember those days. I talked about this at the press conference, right? I remember those days where I was fortunate, right? I could get on the subway in Park Heights and go downtown and get off and be met with a police officer who told me to go back home, that it wasn't for me. But what you're hearing, and I want Black Baltimore to hear, is that when you see a Black Baltimorean from West Baltimore who's going to be building that, know that he had similar experiences, that his family has similar experiences, and this is why we're doing it in this way, so that everybody that lives in Baltimore, no matter their zip code, what they look like, who they choose to love, it doesn't matter. The Inner Harbor belongs to all of us now, and we won't go back to the days where it was just for a few people, and we want to invite those people in, and this is why it's happening this way with these individuals.
As we wind down, let's talk hurdles. What are the hurdles we need to jump over? I know we've got the charter amendment, the zoning, planning commission. What are some of those other hurdles that maybe we're not thinking of right now that, it's going to be a long process? What's on your mind here?
So the first set of hurdles that we get through is the legislative process, which requires basically those 3 bills which were reviewed by the Planning Commission. Well, the beginning of the review of the Planning Commission started last night, and I think will be finished. Will continue on the 21st of December. Then we have to actually get through the City Council's legislative process, and there'll be multiple public hearings where people will get to talk about the plans, their ideas, and so forth. We actually have to be on the ballot for a charter amendment to amend the charter to allow the things that we are hoping to do in connection with the redevelopment of the properties. And then once that's done, then once we're done with the beginning, then the process of actually, taking those plans to construction documents and raising financing and getting the necessary capital and other things and investments that are needed for the public space and the private space, then that process begins. So we're in the beginning of this, and there are many hurdles ahead, and there always are with deals of this magnitude. But I continue to insist that this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reset the trajectory of our city, and to remind people that Baltimore's best days are ahead of it, not behind it in the 80s, but ahead of it, with a generation of people who are excited for the future of this city, and who see all of our potential across the city. You asked about investing in neighborhoods. We do that. We're in Greektown and West Baltimore and Northeast Baltimore, and we see this particular asset as the heart of the city. And if the heart fails, then the body goes down. And the way we are looking at this investment is, as I said, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reset our trajectory and take us on an upward path. And we're super excited, and we're ready for those hurdles.